show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' base capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, radiocallisti.org. Remember to catch our exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random. Exceptional radio.
Good evening. It is the 21st of May of Mapleberry. And it looks like our global totals of COVID have exceeded 5 million. And it looks like the United States represents well over 1/4 of those cases. And that's just positive tests and does not count all of the untested. And then as we go further in, it looks like yesterday there were 22,000 reported new cases, and today there are 27,000 new cases, almost 28,000. And when we dig deeper, yesterday just in Indiana there were 569 cases reported, and today there are 662. And we're about a week out of the reopening of Indiana, at least Indianapolis and Bloomington. I know the whole state opened up at the beginning of the month, and so it looks like things may have been a little premature.
Most definitely were premature. I mean, everybody knew there was, well, not everybody, but the people who were paying attention knew it was premature.
Yeah.
You know, if you go back and listen to our shit, we were saying it was premature. Anybody with half a brain who doesn't listen to people like Elon Musk, you know, it's like, man, I see all these people now finally starting to realize Elon is a charlatan and a fraud, and the thing with Joe Rogan going to Spotify, his audience is so cultish. It doesn't matter what your perspective is on that. They're gonna defend Joe Rogan if it's anything negative. Like, if you say Joe Rogan's selling out, they're gonna defend it. If you say Joe Rogan isn't really an advocate for what he says he is, they're gonna defend him. If you call him like a racist, they're gonna defend him. The stuff that's happening with the media and people getting, I guess, okay, I want to do like, I don't know if it's actually going to take off, but I asked my mom if she knew who Joe Rogan was, and she's like, who? I want to see what, like, people's parents, like, if they actually know who Joe Rogan is, because I feel like that's the only way you can humble somebody in 2020 when they're super famous, and this is not meant to humble him, in the sense of, like, oh, we need to put him in his place, more so like, his fans are so rabid, they need to be reminded that there's only like 10 million of them, and a lot of those plays on YouTube are fake.
You know, my dad actually said something to me way back when Elon went on Joe Rogan's show and smoked the blunt and made the face that became the meme. My dad actually said something like, hey, you know that, have you heard that show, the Joe Rogan podcast? I said, oh yeah, Joe Rogan Experience, that's good stuff. And he said, yeah, well, that Elon guy was on it, and he was talking all about AI, and I'm pretty sure he was smoking pot. And I said, well, yeah, but it's become a meme. And he's like, oh, well, maybe I'll check it out. And so he comes back to me like a couple weeks later. He's talking about how I was like, you know, that guy was a stand-up comedian and was a host for a show on like FX or something like that. I was like, yeah. He's like, huh, I must have missed that. Like,
that's amazing.
he had to hear through like, you know, Google News probably, or Bing News, or one of those news aggregates about Elon getting chastised for smoking weed on a podcast. Mm-hmm. for him to become aware of, you know, the rest of all of that. And I mean, I know he was aware of like Tesla Motors and SpaceX on a very surface level, but I don't think he ever would have made the statement like, "Oh yeah, he's a genius electric car designer, or a astrophysicist, or a rocket scientist," just to take it further down. Like, I think you're right. I think that we've got this really intense and entrenched tribalism within the media, where people will find all their sources of information, and they'll stick to that, and they won't deviate, because once you trust the wellspring of ideas, why go look anywhere else? And it's dangerous because this kind of culture bleeds into forums where you'll find the one vocal member of a forum who is, nobody questions what they say, nobody questions the information they bring to the table. They just accept it as vetted because this person said, hey, this is good stuff here. And I find things that I think is qualify as good stuff all the time, but the reality is half the time it's just me thinking something's funny, and I don't actually expect people to get the joke all the time, because sometimes it's just me being, deep into a rabbit hole of the internet, and who knows how I ended up at that kind of mind state where whatever it is I think is funny. But then again, sometimes I find things that truly are funny, so I keep doing it.
Yeah, it's hard for people not to try to become information authorities, because of the way that our species has evolved. The way we share news helps us survive. So it's like, it's not something that's accidental that people want to share information, or that social media making it really easy has triggered some biological response where people want to be the first to spread information, because that shit was happening before social media existed. People always wanted to be the first to get the gossip around.
We've gone into that pretty in fairly in depth, actually, in the past, about the culture of first and how it permeates through the media. And obviously it's making its way through social media down to the trickle down first effect.
Well, but it's not like the first thing is one element, but it's the idea of having to tell stories, which is why there's no state secrets that stay secret. The Manhattan Project is one of the best examples of a classified project that was known almost instantly because people just can't keep secrets. So,
I was actually thinking about the Manhattan Project earlier. That was conducted in a time when quite literally the smartest people that they could find were involved and managing the project, and then telling the government, hey, this is what's going on. And then at some point after that, you still had really intelligent people working on projects, but then they were managed by people at the federal level or at higher levels, and they were no longer being administrated by the smartest people who were actually running the experiment. They were being administrated through the Pentagon or some defense contractor. And there's a really huge disconnect there. Whereas, like, the people at the highest level of understanding on the Manhattan Project are definitely not the same thing as the people who are managing the show now for, the Finger of God project, because I think that's definitely a military project.
Mm-hmm. And in that, it's the same thing with the economy and the people who are legislating operations, in that, whether Donald Trump works in, hotels and real estate or not, he doesn't have experience in every industry. So the idea that a single person or even Congress can figure things out amongst themselves is a false paradigm, because they're not well educated enough in all of the things that they need to legislate to be making laws about the future. So it has nothing to do with their age. It's that if Nancy Pelosi has been in Congress since before we were born, that means she hasn't had a chance to learn on the ground the things that we've learned in the last 35 years, because her experience is one from being at this echelon in society as an oligarch, that when she's, that whole $22,000 refrigerator thing is like, when she has two refrigerators that are in a completely different tax bracket than some people.
Just the refrigerator.
Just the refrigerator, not the ice cream in it. And she's pointing to that as if tens of millions of people aren't going to be in the lowest tax bracket under $11,000, looking at that refrigerator like, hey, that's like more than I've made in 2 years in one refrigerator. Then she's completely out of touch with what's happening on the ground as to why, when they're like, oh, here's a $1,200 check for getting by, they have no idea what that even means to people because they're so disconnected from reality. They're so disconnected from reality, but they still legislate our reality. So there's a problem with that.
I'm trying to imagine the kind of fancy foods you would find in a $28,000 refrigerator.
Well, I mean, they showed the freezer was stocked full of ice cream that was like $12 a pint.
Oh God!
And it was like full of pints. So I think she bought. Which again, I'm not trying to shame her for indulging in ice cream.
Hey,
it's more so when you have a freezer full of ice cream that is. The ice cream alone is probably worth more than some people have made in a year, and you don't realize that that's the let them eat cake moment that people on the left would then try to defend as if, oh, she's a Democrat, let her be rich and wealthy and rub that in people's faces because she's blue. And that's what I'm like, that's just a lack of empathy for poor people from the left wing at that point. Like they want to defend a rich person who's out of touch because she happens to be on the left wing, not acknowledging that act was so completely out of touch and tone deaf that it's worthy of critique. That action was worthy of critique. When you're in the midst of, at the beginning of a crisis where we have now surpassed Great Depression level unemployment level, and you're pointing at your ice cream as if everything is fine, trying to empathize with people. It's like that person has no idea what real people are going through. And that's where, just again, we have too many rich Democrats, which is not a problem that they're rich. It's the fact that once they became rich, they stopped caring about poor people and started using poor people's situation to perpetuate their position in government. So, I'm like, well, 4 years out of Obama's office, we're still talking about black people getting killed. So what did Obama really do to stop black people getting killed? Nothing.
No.
So
this is the same mechanism they've used the entire time. It's the same mechanism when people say, think of the children, but then nobody actually thinks about the children. I think you raised a good point the other day when you were talking about, abuse in schools is down because you can't get abused if you aren't in class. And it's... Wow, there was an explosion of some kind somewhere.
Whoa, that's weird.
It's okay, buddy, it's okay. Huh.
Never heard him act like that. That's crazy.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on outside. Well, anyways, no, it's the same tools that they've used the whole time to manufacture consent. Bruce, come here, bud.
Can we take a break?
Yeah, let's take a short break. Okay, it seems like one of my neighbors decided it was going to be detonate M80s and shoot shotguns all at once. So, country life.
Yeah.
It's also 9 o'clock here, and they're detonating fucking explosives. So
people in Indiana will shoot tannerite targets, and that shit sounds like you just had a bomb go off in your neighborhood, but it's fucking tannerite.
Seriously, I'm actually kind of looking forward to the playback later this evening when I go and find that explosion in the recording, because that was definitely not expected. I can't even imagine what people are trying to detonate at 9 o'clock, really. I mean, it's dark out. So,
yeah.
Anyways. So, there's been this, so like last week I was reading about the casual relationship between vitamin deficiencies and certain various types of COVID symptoms, like being exacerbated by a lack of melatonin or vitamin D or zinc, any of these things. And turns out that vitamin D has like absolutely no benefit. Like having extra vitamin D in your system could actually cause problems with your body. Like it will it's very problematic. You just got to go outside and stand in the sun for a little bit every day, and that's sufficient to keep your vitamin D levels up. And then things like the selenium or melatonin, those are regulated by the diet. And so it's interesting because I was thinking about this still, because the last time I remember hearing about vitamins being the salvation was in the context of what were those people called, the Dianetics crowd, Scientologists. They would take people off of their medication and then give them vitamins, vitamin treatments, vitamin therapy. And it turns out that a few of those people had like really complex mental health issues. And I remember one of them was some kid, after he stopped taking his antipsychotics, stabbed his mom with a kitchen knife like 30 times. Vitamins are not a one-size-fits-all, like, cure-all, apparently.
No, definitely not.
It's just like, and so the media, of course, is they're desperate to find any kind of solution that's going to give people hope. I'm actually convinced that most of the things that we read, true or not, are really just people trying to, they're grabbing at straws, but they're trying desperately to find clarity or some kind of control, and so they can feel like the world isn't falling apart around them. But I also think that it's really dangerous that in gaining that kind of control, all they're really doing is walking closer to the edge.
I think in that there is this notion that news can be aggregated by people who are not specialists. So when you have newscasters reading news stories, or even journalists printing stuff, you have people regurgitating information sometimes that they're in fields that they're not specialists in. So that's why you get these stories like scientists say parallel universe where time goes backwards, and it's like that's not what they said at all. And it's some journalist trying to get clickbait headlines that comes up with that shit, and then people run with it because it ran in like a legitimate news site,
But then you see like space.com or Science Times, they say, no, we did not find a parallel universe.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so, but people don't go to the proper sources for the right, like they'll go to CNN for space news instead of spaceweather.com or NASA. People were talking about, I saw people posting about the solar minimum this year, and it's like, well, you can go look at the solar levels and readouts and shit. Then you can go look at them constantly. It's not something that CNN really knows about, or if you haven't been studying them, all of a sudden a solar minimum without context of what that means is just words. It's just meaningless words. I mean, obviously those things have meaning in actual science, but to a person who's just being introduced to them for the sake of being like, oh, solar minimum means we're going to have freezing summers and potentially snow in the middle, to the worst possible extrapolation. It's like people want to learn headline clickbait science without applying Occam's razor to it. And then that's how you get conspiracy theories. It's like, no, they didn't fucking turn back. Okay, this is like the thing. So with CERN, it's just not that powerful. So when you have like the black holes that can be created with the Large Hadron Collider, they can only last for like a microsecond because the amount of energy that it takes to actually create like an actual black hole is so immense that we can't actually, like, we need a Dyson sphere sized machine to actually start making something that will cause rifts in space-time enough to cause things like black holes enough to be like, oh, this black hole could affect the gravitation of Earth. Because when CERN was like fired up the first time, people were like, oh, this is going to tear a hole in the fabric of the universe. It's going to create black holes. They're
not accelerating. They're not accelerating enough mass to create a black hole. Even if they did, it would be like the size of a grain of It would be the size of one of the atoms that comprises a grain of sand. It wouldn't.
And then it disappears immediately because they don't have enough power.
Yeah, it wouldn't have enough fuel to maintain itself.
Now, on a local scale, that can cause some crazy, strange effects, which is how they learn about the universe. But that's not gonna like cause a ripple in space-time where it's like, oh, the thing that happens in CERN made something happen in 2020. But it's not to say, like, I was thinking about it because there's ways that you can have really crazy science. So like the power that is used in CERN, it could be like a Morse code message through the future and back. You can communicate to the future and back with CERN.
So this is from CERN itself. The complete detector is 21 meters long, 15 meters wide, and 45 meters high. So that's like 50 feet by 50 feet by 70 feet or so. And that's the detector. That's a giant magnet that is going to hold in place for like some infinitesimally small quantum of time to measure the impact of particles. And we're not talking about enough mass to actually do any. Well, I mean, it's probably pretty spectacular if it's visualized with real-time data, but there's still not enough mass to create anything that can escape the magnetic field of that detector.
Right.
That magnetic field right there is part of the thing that accelerates those particles. It would literally like pull all the metal out of any living organism and just kill it. But they also have safety measures to prevent that kind of thing from happening. And so the idea, of course, that we're going to build a magnet that can accelerate a particle fast enough to create these kind of particle collisions is going to create something bigger than it can contain itself.
There's been one scientist who looked in a particle accelerator while it was going, and it fucking went through his skull, but it didn't kill him.
Yeah, the proton.
There's a Russian guy.
I remember reading about that.
But you can look it up. But it's like, but that's how weird shit happens. Where it's like, it fried his face and his skull and his brain, but it was so precise that it didn't kill him.
Well, it's also such a small particle that it just went through everything, and it didn't cause any structural damage. Well, meaningful structural damage.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, and that was a fluke because if he had turned the wrong way, it could have been a completely different outcome. So it's like there's all these things about when you're talking about machines like that. It's like, yeah, it can kill somebody, but it's not going to be able to do something that, causes a ripple on such a scale where it's affecting anything outside of its own proximity. And it's just shit like that where the
even
extrapolations in the hand of a wrong person can be dangerous because they come to the way wrong conclusions.
even the world engines that the Kryptonians used, it required two of them on opposite ends of the planet, utilizing a power system that we can't even imagine or comprehend, really. And that still was going to take some time to change Earth, or to render the resources of Earth into energy that they could then use. And on a larger scale, man, I'm just trying to think of something even bigger. Like the Death Star. The Death Star is a giant spaceship, and it's still smaller than, like, our moon. It's still smaller than a lot of things. It's gigantic. But it runs on some kind of power system that it can only exist in science fiction. That's the only place that these things work, because there just isn't enough energy that we can tap into at this time in anything that we've got, short of detonating a fusion bomb, and that's not going to happen. I know we're close to being able to leverage the power of fusion, but it's still not here. It's still in only the most controlled situations, and no one's benefiting from it yet. Well, people have jobs, so those people are benefiting from it. But that's just me being a little cynical about it. We're not seeing it. We know it's there.
Yeah.
I think it's the same thing with so I saw this really fantastic infographic where you scroll for about half an hour, and it shows you the relative scale of wealth between somebody who makes $1 million and somebody like Jeff Bezos, who has $138 billion. And then it shows the combined wealth of the next 399 billionaires. And it's obscene how long you have to scroll till you get to the end without, grabbing the scroll bar and jumping. If you just hold your arrow key down, it takes forever. And I remember seeing somebody talk about, America, a place that creates trillionaires, and then I thought, wait, do we even have trillionaires yet? No, we don't. We've got a bunch of billionaires. We've got we've got more billionaires than we know what to do with, and we probably know what to do with them, but no one's doing those things.
Right.
but it's the same. It's a similar. What I'm getting at is that people have enough problems recognizing the difference between a billion and a trillion. They're not going to be able to tell the difference in the energy requirements to create the measurements, or to create the situation where we can take measurements of accelerated particles smashing into each other versus the actual energy requirements to get out of the solar system, versus the energy requirements to ignite a star, versus the energy requirements to sustain a black hole. Mm-hmm. Because they evaporate. If they run out of material, they slowly evaporate.
Jeff Bezos is just trying to figure out how to ship stuff from the moon. He don't give a fuck about scientific discovery. That dude's just trying to figure out how to catapult stuff off the moon for Amazon, so he don't have to have warehouses on in taxable places. Oh, my workers are on the moon. They don't have to take piss breaks. The moon is international territory. That's all he cares about. He don't give a fuck about science.
The Amazon mass driver, the Amazon lunar mass driver, coming 2033.
And that's why, it's funny. If you talk about anything that's post-capitalist, people are like, oh, you and your utopia. And it's like, no, I'm just talking about post-capitalism. Anything that's not capitalist sounds like utopia, because capitalism is so dystopian at this point. Yeah. That anything that's not capitalist sounds like you're describing utopia. Oh, you can go to the pharmacy and not have to pay for your prescription. What is this, utopia? No, actually, that's how they do it in a lot of countries.
Well, there are a lot of things that can come after capitalism that could emerge from a post-capitalist society. Neo-feudalism could come back, or it could emerge. We could get old-style feudalism, which would be worse. Mm-hmm. We could get despotism, which is kind of what it feels like, but it's not yet, because there's some despotic countries out there where they'll just drag you out in the street and shoot your ass. Mm-hmm. It's not the kind of you can't see my air quotes, but I'm saying progressive unions of Europe. And
but Karl Marx says all this shit, which is the funniest part about when people even though Karl Marx was a charlatan who never actually worked a day in his fucking life, he was a good historian.
Yeah.
And he says all this shit. He's like, post-capitalism could be bad.
Isn't he the father of modern social science? I mean, he's regarded as like one of the big brains that has defined the study.
Basically.
So, you know, I think that we can give him a pass for putting all that information together in a way that can be understood. But I think we should also, everyone else needs to not get a pass, because there are a lot of people who are completely unaware of the history, who they associate Karl Marx just with communism, not just communism, but like Soviet Russian communism, which
Right.
is
I
which
mean-
in itself is a really tangled ball of illusions itself.
But at the same time, here's the problem. So, one of the reasons why you can't take his works that seriously is because he lived off of his fucking wife and Engels. He was
Yeah.
always borrowing money from people. So, which is fine in that there's nothing wrong with it. But when you're trying to say you have economic theory and you live your entire life fucking borrowing money from people, I'm going to have to say half your theory is bullshit just because you never actually figured out how to produce capital.
Yeah.
So it's not that he's even wrong. It's that the fact that he never actually did the shit himself makes him a fucking charlatan and he's one of those people who has ideas and doesn't want to try it because then you don't want to accept the failures for your ideas.
That's
He's
like
one of those people.
that's progressivism in the United States.
Yep.
In a nutshell.
Yep.
We don't want to. The ideas sound great, but nobody wants to commit because we might lose the benefit of the empire, and can't have that because it's the stability of the empire that allows these ideas to exist. And I don't know, where do they run these things, in school, in college? Are these little micro economies tested in college even?
No.
So-
Well, and I was thinking about that, you know. It's the craziest part about colleges replacing the guild system is that America has been feeding people this lie that you go to college to get prepared for a job when you don't actually get any experience for these jobs in college. Like, that's not what college is for. It's for a completely different thing. It's for a whole thing. Academia has its own purpose. But then when people are told college is for getting a job, that's not what college is actually meant for. But the system was designed to create middle managers that came in and used their credentials to get the, like, well, only white males were able to use that. Everybody else had to actually have experience. So it was like the same reason Lori Loughlin is pleading guilty to this college
Oh, that's
scam
right.
is what academia was. It like became a mask for the gatekeeping that they use. Like, the gatekeeping goes in all different forms. It could be the guild system being an actual gatekeeping system. It can be the education system. It could be the Masons, whatever the gatekeeping is, to say, oh, we only want white males in this group and we're going to do it in a way that we can't legally get in trouble. There's ways that they can build this shit into the system that it was academia for a while, but because of affirmative action, now people of color and women have been able to, and the fact that offshoring and wars screwed up the white male power over the economy. Like, now we're at a spot where men aren't really that important, and like women and people of color can do all the shit in the economy, but they're trying to justify keeping white men in positions of authority. So it's all like coming to this head, and that's why people are upset with, that's what people are really upset with right now in America, is losing that power structure of the white male. That shit is evaporating like day by day. The white male we have no reason to listen to the white male for an authority figure when you have the one who's supposed to be the head being like, oh yeah, drink some hydroxychloroquine and you'll not get fucking, you'll be positively negative. And that's why people stop listening to old white men, because you can't be saying you're positively negative and have people keep listening to you.
You know, I read about some of the studies. They are doing studies on hydroxychloroquine and as a preventative, as a prophylactic, but they're taking a low dose once a week. They're taking daily zinc supplements, and they're being monitored continuously. That's not taking it every day for the past 2 weeks, then week and a half, 10 days. Oh, I'm going to stop taking it in a couple days. And that's not even the protocol for any of the diseases that it's actually certified for, like malaria or rheumatoid arthritis. And then the other complications, apparently it in some cases has shown to inhibit the immune system from functioning properly.
Yeah.
And then
and this is
it also causes PTSD.
I'm sure there's all kinds of shit like. Well, because people, there's all types of misinformation and misunderstanding. Because, like, the difference between the potential incubation / infection contagious period is different than the length of time that you can actually be exposed and get sick. Because people are like, oh, they opened up and then people are sick 2 days later. Like, yeah, you can be exposed to, like, a flu and have it hit you in like an hour sometimes. Yeah. Sometimes this shit, like depending on where your immune system is at, sometimes you can be exposed and an hour later you're sick. Yeah. It doesn't take 14 days for the shit to incubate in your body. That's not what that's not what a 14-day incubation
My understanding
period
is that it has anywhere from a 2 to 17-day incubation period, meaning if you develop sufficient viral load within 48 hours, you now have COVID-19. And if you have a really robust immune system and you're fighting it, but finally, you know, after 2 weeks, almost 3 weeks, it finally breaks through, you have COVID-19. And that's the incubation period. It's just from the time you're exposed to the point where viral load reaches critical mass.
Yep.
And then after that, it could take up to 37 days 37 days before your body figures out how to develop antibodies to fight it off. That's serious business. That's not the flu.
No.
It's way complicated. I was actually expecting the numbers to start going up within the first week after Indiana opened up. And it turns out that, you know, a lot of places they open up and the numbers keep going up, but it's not in the cities where people were quarantining or isolating. It's in the rural areas where people were not necessarily adhering to the healthcare guidance.
Yeah, and now all these churches are threatening to open back up, and I'm like, fucking let them, man. Do it. Hey, if you want to march to the front line and die for capitalism.
I think it was Alabama. It was one person infected 180 people.
This is capitalism's death march, yo. That's what it is. These people are doing a death march for capitalism, and it's like, hey, we can try to stand in their way and let them drag us with them, or we can just let them do capitalism's death march and be proud and patriotic the whole way, because it's like, this system was fucked. The way that things were going was fucked. We have a chance to change things, and there's a bunch of people who are trying to pretend they need to go get their hair cut. Where the fuck you need to go with? Like, there's nowhere to go. We went to Target the other day. The mall's not open. You can't go hang out at the mall. The bars are all closed down. Bars are closing down left and right. And I'm like, looking at how many people are not going to get STDs because they couldn't go to bars this year and sleep around. A bunch of people's genitals just got saved from being burned this year. It's like, you guys need to take your fucking W's, man.
Yeah.
Stop trying to rush out and burn your genitals. That's all people are going to do. That's all people are going to do is just rush out and make some bad decisions, rub their genitals on things they shouldn't.
Nationally, it turns out that even though there are fewer drivers on the road during the self-isolation period, the number of traffic fatalities didn't diminish proportionally to the lack of traffic. So it turns out that the same people who were driving like idiots before, they had essential jobs, and they were still driving like idiots.
Yeah. Well, or are essential job people who work essential jobs overwork to a point where when they're on the road, it's worse than being drunk because when you're
Oh
tired,
yeah,
your driving is worse than being drunk.
yeah.
So like, if
So,
these essential workers are working triple shifts and then got to drive back and forth because our society doesn't have good enough public transportation for them not to have to
so
drive
they're
themselves.
like they're sleep deprived, drunk driving, and they're probably talking to somebody on their phone, and there are fewer people on the road, so there's like this weird increased sense of security that there's nobody
Yep.
around.
I bet they're crashing into light poles and shit, falling asleep at stoplights.
Yeah.
Fucking, that's what I like because of the way I learned how to read statistics, knowing how they're being presented and what is being hidden from us. It's like, oh, the people getting in accidents are the ones that are most at risk in the first place because they're fucking overworked and underpaid, so they can't take any time off. So every time they get on
That's
the
not
road,
represented in the statistics.
no, because it's presented a different way.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, the drivers are no worse right now because the roads are less. They're trying to present it as like, oh, driving isn't the problem. Like, no, it's not driving the problem. It's people being fucking tired and overworked that's the problem. Those people should never be behind the wheel in the first place, especially not semi-truck drivers.
Yeah, well, that's just another case, what am I trying to say? That's just another way of saying we need to automate certain tasks.
Yeah.
We really do. There's a way to have a technician on board a primarily autonomous semi-transportation vehicle, and their only job is to make sure that the systems are running properly.
Yeah, man, it's really funny that, a modular society in that if you drive up to a bank and those little tubes go back and forth between you and the teller, it's like, why haven't we gotten to the point where we're using those for our residence as like, oh, if I need something, it can just be tubed all the way to my place from the port. If I get something shipped from China, once it gets to America, it could be tubed all the way here if we had just been fucking setting up the infrastructure correctly. Because the issue is that the more fractal that network is, the less likely one can be a terrorist to take it all down. Like if every town has its own little fractal tube network, you can't just gas the main thing and be like, oh, I'm gonna release poison into this entire tube network, because you're only hitting one, and because it's only one, they can close it all off and isolate. And so there's so much benefit to having isolated, interconnected, mycelial network driven in environments where everything is connected in a way where it's like the way we can call each other, like I can call you on my cell phone, I can Zoom with you. I should be able to tube something from my house to your residence without fear of somebody looking inside, because that's the way the tube should work.
Yeah.
The tube network should be without fear of like, oh, they're fearing you sending heroin. Well, if I do, who fucking cares? Nobody, like, it's like the fact that people are so concerned with like monitoring every single person's transaction to be like, I want to make sure this one is within the bounds of what I believe is okay. Then they prevent these amazing things from happening because they're so concerned with that one dude sending heroin to the person who wants to do heroin, because that they're not okay with somebody doing heroin. Like, I've never done heroin in my life, but I'm not gonna stop somebody from trying it because that's their fucking prerogative. So if I want a tube network, I'm not gonna stop the tube network because somebody's gonna kill himself using heroin. Like, that shouldn't stop me from building this awesome thing because somebody's going to abuse it, because everything gets abused by some idiot at some point. Coffee gets abused.
Well,
Fucking
We know that Portugal has a solid model. They treat drug abuse as a mental illness. They don't arrest people for it. They put them in programs to give them health or help and treatment, and it's working. They've got years now of empirical data that demonstrate that this is an effective method to combat drug abuse.
And then there's no new users in a lot of these places where they legalize this stuff. It's like, no, kids don't want to try heroin because it fucking sucks. Everybody knows it sucks. Nobody who's doing heroin is doing it because they want to. And all the kids know that shit, so that nobody's rushing out to try that shit.
Yeah. I think that DARE probably did more to upend any kind of sensibilities that kids had. DARE was like everyone's first glimpse into a sensationalized world of drug use. And it was full of actors. It wasn't like a documentary where you actually had to look at somebody who had suffered 20, 30, 40 years, well, 40 years for people who have a lot of money, but decades of drug abuse and what it does to their bodies. There's a huge physiological impact that comes with that kind of lifestyle. And I mean, I'm pushing 40, and I have friends who are of similar age who, lived hard. They rode hard, and some of them look like they're 10 years older than me, 20 years older than me on the really hard end. And it's tough. No one expects us to end up like old weathered gloves until we're appropriately aged.
Yeah.
And by that I mean like late 60s, 70s. That's when you should start looking like an old glove. Maybe your 80s. Right. But if you're healthy, that's the dilemma. We've got a society that wants to try every kind of diet or health plan that people can come up with. And there's a big difference between like a dietitian and a nutritionist and a let's see, what's another fancy word for a meal trainer. Keto was all the rage for like a year or two, and then a while ago, it seemed like all of the marketing for keto just kind of evaporated. And before that, there were all sorts of things like South Beach diet or Atkins diet, and they're unsustainable and they cause all sorts of really serious trauma to your digestive tract.
Yeah.
You eat nothing but meat all the time, you're gonna get colon cancer.
Well, and the craziest part about the whole concept is like diet is meant to be a way of eating that's not temporary. Like your diet is supposed to be how you eat. That's
all the time.
Not all the time. It's supposed to, like, diet and lifestyle are effectively synonymous for the sake of this definition. And I think people in America have become so infatuated with weight.
It's lifestyle tribalism.
Yeah, but they've also not realized that our weight fluctuates on a natural cycle, and they want to do things to stay unnaturally thin all year round. So that's where you end up with people getting tummy tucks and butt lifts and all these things where your body is meant to change year round.
Oh man! So when somebody gets a tummy tuck because they're feeling a little bit larger than they would like to feel, where does that stuff go? Where does it go?
Well, it's
now they've like limited their
fats. Yeah, they take out actual fat cells, which when you shrink,
they remove the ability to store nutrients.
Yes,
Ugh.
That's why it's so fucked up, because then it starts fucking up their capacity to process stuff. Because when you lose weight the proper way, your fat cells actually shrink, versus when they do tummy tucks, they actually just suck out the fat cells. So then that reduces those people's capacities to process nutrients.
And if they can't process nutrients properly, then the body goes for the fat immediately.
Exactly. So it fucks everything up in a cycle they get stuck in because they don't understand.
This is a question for the galley.
Body's gonna cycle anyway. This is like, again, everybody's body's different, but everybody's body's everyone's body cycles. That's the thing that everybody shares in common, is the fact that everyone cycles, no matter where you're at. It may be a 3-season cycle, it may be a 5-season cycle, it may be a 4-season cycle, which Westerners are the most used to the 4-season cycle, but everybody isn't on a 4-season cycle.
So I've got a question for the audience, and I want to give them 5 seconds or so to think about this. What is the largest concentration of fat in the body? The brain. It's almost all fat. And if you don't have enough body fat, that's what goes first. That's when you atrophy.
I don't know if that's necessarily accurate in that, especially like, is it okay? So there's a barrier. There's a blood-brain barrier, and then gray matter is not necessarily fat, but the issue is like your brain has hydration levels, and the myelin sheath needs to have fat cells in order to
insulate itself from electrical activity.
So it's like knowing that a brain weighs about 8 pounds, like I would be hard pressed to say that the fat is the most concentrated point when you have some women who have like breasts that weigh more than 8 pounds apiece. So it's like,
yeah, but there are also glands in those things.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like proportionally, yes, there might be parts of the brain, but that's like, again, it's it's not to say, yes, fat is very important for the brain. That's like, I'm not trying to contradict you. It's more so the way these things are presented. It's like they'll say things to make it sound one way, and it, like the whole reason I said it that way is, again, it's like a brain is about 8 pounds. Like there's no way a brain is going to be weighing more than some people's boobs. Like just to say like this.
I think 8 pounds is given a lot of credit. I think the average brain is like 5.
Right. Yeah, in America. yeah. Fuck, man.
Yeah, but that's the thing, is that there's brain atrophy is a thing that occurs when people are unable to reach nutritional thresholds, and that's part of that's one of those things that's really dangerous about this. I think that's one of the things that's concerning about the pandemic and the availability of food supply, or the sustainability of existing food supply chain, is that if we enter a really dark phase where food is unavailable, there are going to be a lot of hard dietary shifts for a lot of people. Food is going to become more expensive. Quality foods will be available to people who can afford to get them, but that's, as we're seeing with 44 million unemployed now. That's a lot of people. That's a pretty big dent. That's over 10% of our population is unemployed now. And it seems like our Congress doesn't want to extend the unemployment insurance protections, and they don't want to. They want to extend really extreme liabilities to businesses that can't even staff their operations because the unemployment insurance pays better than the job.
I mean, but that's because we're, as we've been saying, the jobs are exploitative and are meant to be manufactured consent to say, if you're in a right to work state and people are saying, oh, it's either work for $7.50 an hour or be homeless, then these people were forced to work for $7.50 an hour in the first place. So yeah, they're not gonna rush back to that fucking bullshit ass job where people are like, I saw a sign at Bloomington Hardware saying, please do not bang on the windows. You have to understand we're under pressure and we don't have that many people working, so you can't rush us. And people are losing their fucking minds. People weren't civil before this stuff. So like, why is the narrative that people should rush back to uncivilized customers for minimum wage? Who wants that?
Nobody in their right mind.
And what planet is that desirable Like, man, I can't tell you how stress-free I felt because of not having the existential dread of like capitalism hanging over my head constantly. There's nothing to be advertised. Like whenever I see advertisements, like, oh, these people think there's like money to floating around for them to buy stuff. And it's funny to see the only thing that's really making money right now is the notion of individualized face masks, because Americans need to express their individualism. So they're like, oh, I'll get bling on my face mask, or I'll get a face mask that looks like a samurai or something. And it's like, that's how I look, I express my individualism as an American. And people can't help but throw money at that because they've been so trained that it's like, it's a weird cult, man. You're seeing a cult of capitalism in its death march, because the people that are so hardcore about it are the ones that are going to put themselves in the most risk for it right now. And they're not immune to it. COVID doesn't care if you fucking love capitalism or not. So
this last week, I was reading about first quarter earnings, and apparently Walmart was the only one that did well versus Amazon. And Amazon had some good business, but not as well as Walmart. But then it also came out in the last couple of days that they are shuttering Jet. It seems they're gonna stop their partnership with Jet, which is like
what's Jet?
It's an e-commerce shipping. It's their like internet warehouse. And so they're gonna Walmart got what it needed, it looks like, and they're gonna get out.
I'm thinking about it. I went to Target the other day, and their electronics section was empty as fuck. So I'm wondering if we've seen the end of cheap electronics because of the way that they're doing all the trade wars and shit.
Yeah.
So how we hit the bottom. Like, I was looking, 60-inch TVs are like $329 right now. You can find a 60-inch TV for like $300. I don't know if that's going to be that in 2021.
Well,
I don't know if that's going to be around in 2 years. In like 2 years, I don't think that's going to be around.
So the microphones that we've used for the past year and a half, the cheap Chinese mics, every time I bought one, they were about $21 a piece with the suspension and the boom arm and all that stuff, and the shitty cable that I ended up throwing away too. So they're all $21, and I bought all these things before everything happened. And I was just going online, and Amazon likes to remind me, it's like, hey, would you like to buy another one of these? And it's like, why would I buy another one of these? I've already got 4 of them, and it was $45.
Whoa, that's already double.
$45. And so the cheap Chinese video web camera that I use, when I bought it, it was it was like $40. But I remember a month before, because I was looking at webcams then, it was like 19 something dollars. Everything from China has doubled in price, it seems.
Wow. Holy shit.
Let me see if I can think of other things that I've been casually observing. Oh, my tractor controller, my software, DJ software controller. At the beginning of the year, there was this DJ Tech Tools thread about a guy who was taking the first gen controllers like I have, cutting off the jog wheel sections, and then creating creating jog wheel controllers that could be used to add on to an existing Control S4 setup to give it 4 platters of control, so you wouldn't have to switch between decks. And I thought, well, that's super cool. I've got one of these. Maybe I'll like upgrade my system at some point and send this guy my control, and he can modify it and give me this really awesome upgraded setup. Well, I was looking at these things online the other day, and they're selling for $250 to $350 for a first gen 10-year-old DJ controller.
Jesus.
And that's crazy.
Wow.
I mean, I'm bonus. That's awesome for people who held on to those things and they can sell them now. But this guy who's been developing this advanced addition to controllers by repurposing old stuff, the bottom fell out of that completely.
That's crazy.
He's not going to be able to afford. People aren't going to be able to afford a $300 controller, and shipping to and return from the Netherlands for a fancy controller. That's just obscene.
Yeah. I mean, but where they gonna go to party though?
Exactly.
But at the same time, it's like, you know, there's all these online DJs, but then you don't need a tractor to. So there's all these things about what's happening right now that are changing how things occur. Where nobody, you know, this is getting back to the acousmatic stuff. Nobody cares how the fucking DJ is gonna do it when you can't see it. So
That's right.
if 100,000 people are listening. And you know they were watching, but they don't have to be watching. They don't care if you're using a tractor controller or just playing the stuff on, you know, putting it together in your own program so that the mix is automatically perfect or whatever.
You know, what's funny is that my fondest memories of raves or going to some music event, I was actually engaged with my friends, and I wasn't paying attention to what the person on the stage was doing. Like, I could give them two shits about DJ whomever, who was probably throwing down, and they were probably doing great, but it wasn't about what they were doing for me. It was about that moment that I was sharing with my people. I mean, I remember seeing Fatboy Slim in Detroit a few years ago, and I couldn't see the stage because everyone was crowded around. All I could see was the back of other people's heads. And instead of worrying about it and, oh, I gotta see the stage, I gotta see the performance, I turned around and I noticed that I was surrounded by my friends, and we all just had a blast together.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing that actually matters, is that, you know, as everyone gets further and further away from each other and more isolated, we've got to figure out better ways to make the interaction really truly meaningful. And you know, big ups to the internet DJs who have figured out the streaming stuff and can throw down live and have the promotional machine like at their disposal to get a bunch of people together to share in the moment with each other, because that's where it's at. They figured out how to those are the internet rave promoters, the two-dimensional rave promoter. And you know, there's always going to be some weird transition between, you know, in real life or internet life and all of this stuff, but I think that we have all the tools necessary to bridge those worlds. One of our friends was talking to me about how the cell phone is a quantum communication device, and it's like, yeah, I mean, you're right. We're like nowhere near each other, and yet we can see what the other's doing, and it's all in real time, and there's whatever delay exists is negligible. And it allows us to be, especially now with like every cell phone has a fancy camera at this point. It doesn't matter which camera you use, they look good. And so you can share your world with somebody in a matter of seconds.
Yeah.
And I think we take that for granted. It's like, I remember when I was a little kid, you know, single digits, and I remember seeing it was a magazine article about video phone. And, you know, it was a tiny, I mean, smaller than the smallest iPhone screen, and it was choppy, pixelated, and black and white. And here we've got full HD, ultra HD, and it's crystal clear. You can see the nose hairs and ear hairs on people.
Everybody has communications to the level of what was on the Enterprise in the 90s.
Yeah.
You know, and we all take that shit for granted now. Even down to having the it's not quite perfect, but the international translator Skype. I don't know if Skype has it built in, but there's a couple of programs that have them built in where, you know, if you want subtitles, it'll give you subtitles from different languages in real time and shit. So
I would be surprised if Microsoft and Google had not baked that kind of technology into their content
I think it's
systems.
Microsoft Teams or something.
Yeah, the new Skype.
Yeah.
So I did.
But again, that's like Star Trek level shit that everybody has. Like a 5-year-old has access to that shit now.
Oh, straight up! The other night it was like the first really warm night of officially spring, I think, and I went outside because I kept hearing this bird that I couldn't identify, and I was like, you know, Siri, identify this bird, and then it recorded the bird, and then it found the bird on the internet, and it took maybe 20 seconds. Holy shit, my phone just told me what kind of fucking bird I was listening to.
Yeah.
That's how much power we actually have at our fingertips, and it's nobody talks about that. I've never seen anyone talking about, like, actually I know one person who's always like, hey, check it out, hey Siri, what song is this? And then Siri's like, oh, this is such and such remix of, you know, some obscure drum and bass track, and it's like, how the fuck did it know that? And of course we know that, you know, there's a digital fingerprint that runs basically in the noise of the audio, and we can't hear it, but the computers can. But the fact that they can identify a bird, that's actually impressive. I think I'm more impressed by computers every day that I use them as I learn, like, just how capable they've been made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, when it comes to sonic analysis and indexing and matching sounds against each other, computers are made for shit like that, and that's why machine learning has evolved so quickly, in that what people conflate with artificial intelligence a lot of time is just actually machine learning.
Yeah.
But machine learning it's come a really long way.
Yeah. No, it really has. I was so I took an astronomy class this last term, and part of it was participating in this program called Zooniverse. And what I did was I helped to classify gravitational waves and muons. So basically I was looking at pictures of gamma rays for the muons, and I was looking at images that were created by LIGO and Virgo. And that's the coolest stuff, is learning about how, you know, gravity can pull on a laser beam sufficiently that it creates recognizable patterns. And so part of the classification job was to help it learn how to identify the various types of anomalous readings, so that it could more quickly identify those, so they could turn the sensitivity up on the whole system itself of the sensors and get more accurate readings. But they had to teach it, like, hey, this is what a certain type of gravitational wave anomaly looks like. Because the computer is fast, it can't quite tell the difference every time until it develops a large enough database to reference against, and it can access that database instantly. Whereas you or I would take years to look through that many images. It it knows because it has a large enough database. That's machine learning. And I think you're right. I think it's really easy for AI and machine learning to be confused with each other.
Yeah.
And they have,
because, like, Watson is basically just machine learning.
Mm-hmm.
Siri is just basically machine learning, but the interface makes it feels like it's AI.
Yeah.
In the way that we're told that AI is going to work. Like, Siri doesn't actually learn you individually, in that the database is using everybody's answers to then check against yours, but it's not like Siri only listens to you ever. It would be different if Siri only learned your habits and facts relative to you. That'd be a completely different program.
That would be a bot.
But that's how it feels. Like, when you're talking to Siri in your pocket, in your phone, in your device, especially if they would allow you to change her name and answer to a different name, then it would feel even more personalized. But that they're at a level where it feels like Siri is your friend, your device, your AI, but it's really just machine learning.
Yeah. It's just like those bots that learned how to talk mad shit.
Yep.
They're not intelligent. They just have a large index of responses that they weigh against other potential responses.
Yep.
And, like, in the case of, which is it Deep Blue that plays chess? one of the IBM computers plays chess.
I
That
think so.
that thing is just capable of running every scenario imaginable really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason, I mean, that's the reason it wins. It's not that it can think, and it's not like what's the Judge Watson called, the one that does the legal briefings. That thing just has access to every precedent known to man. So it's not actually. I mean, it can come up with suggestions, but those things have to be reviewed by a human at the end.
Right.
I saw a movie called Extinction recently. It was pretty terrible, but it had a distinct synthetic life, synthetic humanoid versus, impending onslaught type scenario. And of course, at the end, it turns out that the invaders are humans that got displaced from Earth originally, and they were coming back to take their home back. But it got me thinking about it. It's like that was a story about AIs because they developed their own thoughts and emotions and ideas, and they responded with emotions. And we've talked about how, the potential for an AI to emerge, it probably wouldn't announce that it's sentient because who knows what humanity would subject it to. And, in this story, humans are mad at synthetics because they're stealing all the jobs that humans don't want to do. And they, one of them gets violent defending itself, and they're not supposed to do that. But it's all about human fear. And even when the humans come back, they thought they were going to go and kill a bunch of, murderous robots. And it turns out that the murderous robots are really just trying to protect their families.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, if you go back and watch the Animatrix, that's what happened when they came to offer peace.
Yep.
Yep. And I think they had that Patton Oswalt rant, and he seems to have forgotten that they've been used as batteries. But in that, humans were always the ones that were the abusers, and when robots became sentient,
I just want to
didn't want to be slaves.
I just want to make sure everyone knows that in that interview, he basically put Cypher up on a fucking pedestal.
Yeah, it was real bad.
I'm gonna be really clear about this. Cypher's character is a bitch.
Yeah,
Cypher's character
rant ever.
Oh my god, Cypher's character is like the absolute lowest form of intelligence that is capable of being recognized as being part of the resistance. And to suggest that is a good way to end up, to come to the realization, wait, put me back in there, that fake steak, that brain steak tastes real, and I can't tell the difference. Oh man. I don't think, I'm no longer surprised when celebrities, declare their allegiance to the empire. It's not at all. I'm not anymore. I'm actually surprised when celebrities stand up and they're like, "Hey, fuck you guys," because that actually means something. Because that means they're they're able to recognize, even through their vast success afforded by the empire, that something is still wrong, and they're willing to stand up and put maybe their reputation or potential future career on the line to make that kind of statement. And I'm sure it affects some people, but people who have a platform like that need to use it for those purposes. And if they're just kowtowing to the empire and delivering party lines or suggesting that, hey, you're better as a battery for society, holy shit, that guy wants people to go and go do jobs that don't pay well and that they don't enjoy. They might not even realize they don't enjoy it because the job sucks that bad and their life sucks so bad as a result of that terrible career.
Well, because then you don't need a comedian if your life is awesome and you're witty enough to make jokes on your own. I don't need to go see Patton Oswalt if my life isn't depressing because of capitalism. So his job is directly threatened by everybody else's existential joy. It's and I think it's made painfully obvious when he says shit like that. Comedians who make their living off of making people laugh and get away from the dread of daily life because of the way capitalism makes everybody zombified. He knows his shit's threatened by people not being slaves to that shit. So he's like, maybe you should just go back into the Matrix. Cypher was kind of right. Like, man, if you don't shut your fucking robot supporting ass up, like, no, man, we're not trying to make the Sentinels our overlords. We can coexist with them without making them our overlords. Like, that's a whole different existence.
So it appears that nowadays millennial dads are spending more than 3 times as much time with their children as their parents spent with them. And I'm sure that there's some coronavirus impact that's made those numbers jump.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that those numbers were going to be higher anyways.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see what happens with that. You know, I think this generation's dads are more open emotionally, so we'll see what the impacts of that are on the next generation. Like, they already aren't bullying as much. It's not like, there's some bullies where you're like, you still see some shitty stories about kids getting bullied and stuff, but it's way less
than it used to be.
Yeah, it's way less prevalent than it used to be.
You don't have nearly the as high an incidence of, hold on, let me pull that numbers back up. Yeah, alcohol and drug use are actually going down among millennials.
Yeah, and part of it is, you know, you can't get hard drugs coming in when the ports are closed, so that's going to be shut down. And where, you know, who's going to be taking ecstasy at home because they can't rate, you know, who the fuck is that person?
Oh, seriously, the person who needs ecstasy alone at home on the weekday.
That's a sad individual.
I really hope that
doesn't. Sad.
I hope that doesn't exist. The whole point of party drugs was that you were taking them at the party with the people you're partying.
Yeah.
Like, that's why they're called party drugs. You have to be at a party for them to work. I mean, I'm sure they still have some kind of effect, but it's not going to be anywhere near as profound unless you've got, you know, 40,000 watts of sound and monstrous bass. No, normal people don't have those kind of playback systems in their homes.
No, they definitely don't.
I mean, maybe you could fake it if you had a small enough room and you packed it in there with like a miniaturized big style sound system and bought a bunch of lights and a fog machine and put the fog machine in like the other room or something. But even
Somebody's definitely getting sick in that shit.
Ugh. I hated fog machines. Whenever the fog machines would go off, I would leave that room. Mm-hmm. I would just try and find some other place that didn't smell like that crap.
Yeah, it fucks with that ozone fucks with your lungs in the first place.
Yeah. It's not a nebulizer. You're not supposed to breathe that shit.
No, definitely not.
You know, that's probably a good thing, though. The clubs are no longer... People aren't getting fog juice lung because they can't go to the club to get it. Because I'm sure that if those things were still fully functional, people would be going to the club, they'd get the fog juice lung, and they'd get the corona lung.
Yeah. Well, and I think what's going to end up happening is, like, you know, obviously the club was just a mating ritual.
Yeah.
It was all just a mating ritual, so now people are just going to have to be super straightforward on both sides. Like, obviously guys were already dumb about it, so I don't think that it's like guys were already straightforward, but I guess what I'm saying is now women are actually going to be like straightforward to men because there's no roundabout stuff. And I think that's like all the dudes who are smart enough not to be sending dick pics and shit, they'll be fine. They'll be fine without clubs. So as long as you're not like sending vulgar messages and like sending dick pics, you don't need a club. I think those people will be fine because like I saw like a lot of my female friends are posting the messages that these out-of-pocket dudes are sending like during the shutdown. And it goes like 0 to 100. They'll be talking about how, you know, the everybody's suffering from COVID, and then it's like they're talking about the girl's anatomy immediately. Then you're like, dude, this is why we can't have nice things.
I mean, was that person successful in
Of course
the
not.
real world in the first place? So
No, of course not. That person was never successful, because I'm saying those guys were never successful. So I think like those guys weren't going to be successful. They were just the ones making the bars annoying in the first place, because they were all like, those were the dudes hitting on all the girls, getting rejected, making the bars awkward.
Yeah.
So now that like those guys are relegated to their homes, all the people who were not having problems can just connect through the internet anyway. They'll be fine.
I saw this meme. It was making fun of this very thing. God, where the fuck is it? Anyways, it's the meme is the guy and the girl on texting, and he's like, "Hey, we're not cousins."
Oh God.
And I imagine that's just, I want that to be some kind of satire, but on some
But it's
level,
not.
I know that it can't be. Like,
Yeah, like somebody's actually used that as a line before somewhere. Probably multiple people, because guys never do anything original.
That's some.
I mean,
Like, males in America are the saddest motherfuckers in the world. It's like the capacity to court a woman is so based in what they think will please their male friends, and they either they don't realize it or they don't care, because they're actually like wanting to please their male friends in the first place.
well,
There's so many layers.
this is actually really amusing. When we first
Okay.
met, 20 years ago, I think we were at your apartment, and I was laughing, or I was talking about, because on my way over, I was behind somebody's SUV, they're like Suburban, that had 5,000 watts of bass, and I was like, man, it was just like rattling my eyes, and you laughed, and I said, oh no, man, I'm convinced it's like they think it's like a mating call or something like that. And you started laughing, and you had a friend, Catherine, I think, and she started cracking up, and she's like, I just installed some giant subwoofer system in my car. I was like, well, you're gonna get all the dudes, and we had a good laugh about it. But during that period of time, I'm pretty convinced that if a woman had, or a female had, a banging box with loads of juice to power the subs, they would have the attention of any guy around.
Oh yeah, for
Like
sure.
in a few seconds, because they want to know if it was set up right. And then not only that, but they want to dial it in for them. And it's like, yo, bro, this person clearly just spent a load of money and probably had it professionally installed and tuned. There's nothing that anyone's going to be able to do by ear to improve it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I definitely know that was a thing for a while, because it was like, I feel like more women had systems for a while than men.
Mm-hmm. Because dudes didn't have cars, but they could afford to put a system in their girl's ride.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And then they'd end up breaking up, and the girl would keep the system or whatever. And it's like, or they just straight up got them themselves, and it's like,
Yeah, because believe it or not, there's some ladies out there who like bass music,
Yeah.
and they have discerning tastes, and they don't want it to sound like factory powered ass. And I mean that in the most sincere way possible. Factory powered ass is when people turn up their factory stereo to the point that it starts farting. It never sounds good. There's no amount of turning those dials that'll make that sound good at levels that are loud enough to be satisfactory for like a real bass connoisseur. I like a lot of bass in music, but I also think that there's a time and place for it, and it's not always the time. Sometimes it's the place, but it's not always the time when you're in traffic. Maybe on the open road or something.
Yeah, being in traffic, I've been in Tennessee where everybody had subwoofers, and there was like a traffic stop, so it's like you're just everybody's car is just rattling,
Yeah.
and it's just all this conflicting bass, and it's like you can't hear one beat out of the crowd.
Well, I was just thinking of Black Expo in Indianapolis.
Right, yeah, shit like that for
Where-
sure. It's the same.
Well, you might get lucky, and you might be in a part of traffic where everyone's dial is like they're all tuned into one person's FM transmitter, and so
Yeah.
everyone's listening to the same thing, or they're tuned into some radio station that's like playing something that everyone wants to listen to. But that's not. That's like
That's
a freak
the-
occurrence.
Yeah, that's the exception, not the rule for sure. Because everybody wants to play their own track that their cousin recorded, or they recorded, and they had their rap that they want to have everybody hear. Because the bass line's fat, and they want to make sure, and you know that's the way it feels when you're playing your music. But all everybody hears wah wah wah. Nobody
Yeah.
hears the, you know, fucking.
You know the.
It feels so exhibitionist when you're playing your subs.
You know, if you want to be heard in a car with the music, it's not bass music that gets heard. That's intelligible. You got to put on some like classical music because you can actually turn that up like as loud as your system will possibly get ever
Or
in
some
its
Hans
life.
Zimmer,
Yeah, and
some shit like that.
everyone for blocks will hear
Yeah.
like his piano composition or his string composition, and because it's backed by an orchestra and they're filling the rest of the sound spectrum that most bass music doesn't pay as much attention to, and especially people who are building their car systems to reproduce bass music, it's generally all low end.
Pretty much, because then when you look at those contests that they used to have, it was just like,
I used to go
how
to
much
that
bass can you get? And it's like, well, that's. Then you have to wear earplugs to even.
And you have to have a
Be
remote.
close to it,
Well, you have to have a
yeah.
remote so you can turn it up. I had a SQL system for a while, and it cost a lot of money, and I couldn't. I only ever turned it up like halfway because anything more than that, I felt like my lungs were about to collapse or I was about to puke. I had a system at one point that I knew it was too much because I was giving a buddy a ride home from some party, and we had to stop, and he puked because the bass was too intense. Like, it was just too much.
That's
And
funny.
at that point, it's like, maybe I don't need 2,000 watts in a single 12-inch system with, like, you know, a 2.5 cubic foot enclosure that's loaded up with fucking polyfill. And the thing was, it never sounded good, but it was just powerful. Like, I could turn it up, and it felt like I was being punched in the back.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of, there were a few few track selections that was kind of like a weird massager in the car, but it never sounded right. It was just too powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, man. It's weird how much subwoofers will vibrate air. You know, you'd be smoking and the sub would vibrate the smoke coming out of your mouth.
Yeah, it ripples.
Yeah. And that's just too much power, man. You don't need that much power.
Yeah.
Nobody needs that much power. But America had us convinced we all needed that much power.
Seriously, I think in the most well-insulated car I've ever had, I only needed like 650 watts just to the sub in a properly tuned enclosure, and then the rest of it I spent on a head unit that had like, I think it was 50 watts RMS per channel, and then I bought some nice speakers for the doors and tweeters, and that's it. And it sounded fine. I could never turn it up so loud that I could turn it up loud enough that I couldn't stand it, but I could never turn it up so loud that it would like distort. It would just be too much for me. And that's all I really needed. I realized at one point that if I put together a sound system that was capable of reproducing jazz and classical music faithfully, it made everything else sound really good. It was kind of surreal because, you know, after a decade of listening to ounces and boots and cats and dueling vibrators, eventually you just want to listen to something that actually sounds like music sometimes. And if you have a narrowcast system that just does deep bass.
I mean, it's like, okay, we listen to jazz in the mornings because hardcore hip hop at 9 a.m. is not palatable.
Yeah, no, that's yeah,
Trap music at 9 a.m. just does not feel right.
no,
Drum and bass at 9, it don't work.
it's too early for that.
So that's where,
I don't listen to drum and bass until 5 o'clock and later.
right. I think that's about the time when we ever start listening to drum and bass is like after 5 or 6, because it does not work for the time of day that other stuff works for, and that's kind of where you can't force a music in the wrong part of your circadian rhythm, or else it puts you in a bad mood.
Yeah.
I think that's where a lot of people misuse music.
Yeah. No, in the mornings I've been on this feature-based kick for a while. I want it to be nice and chilled out, and I want to hear music. I'm not trying to be assaulted by stabs of a slicer that are just like...
Low end in the morning is a lot. It's a whole lot.
Yeah, you don't need too much. Just enough.
I mean, but like around noon is different.
Yeah, it's true.
Noon is like when I feel like the bass starts to be necessary, and it's like, but it's a different type of, like, you know, the stuff that you listen to at noon is going to be different than what you listen to at 7 p.m., even if both of them have bass.
Yeah.
And, if you're paying attention, you know, and again, I think that's where some people stay in one genre of music all day because of cultish devotion, but that's very basic.
I just had this image of a person who wakes up and immediately starts listening to death metal.
Right, yeah. No, man, there's people like that who are like, oh, I'm a death metal, I can't listen to anything but death metal. Like, okay, we get it. You like death metal and you want that to be your thing. You know, Snoop Dogg was listening to Frozen the other day.
Yeah.
Like, even Snoop Dogg can listen to fucking Frozen. So there's no reason to be putting up this front as if you can't listen outside of a genre without it compromising your masculinity or some shit. It's like, this is crazy as shit people think defends their masculinity in this country. And that's what they do it for. That's all they ever do it for, is to defend their masculinity. That's all males do. Try to prove we're men. Not me personally, but I mean, as males, like,
I mean, but you can,
in this country,
you can only chop firewood for so long.
Right.
You can only stand by the grill for so long. Eventually, you got to eat something. You can only say "hold my beer" so many times before you don't come back to get your beer. There's got to be limits. I think that we're in a really unique position right now, socially, because of pandemic plague action, where it's possible to you know, redefine things. You know, if dads are spending 3 times more time with their kids than dads were in the past because there's more time for it, that's a good thing. Maybe we should figure out a way for society to hold on to something like that. I remember when I was growing up, I used to read all the time about, you know, dads that were AWOL and how kids were being raised without fathers and how this is a really serious problem. And it's a problem. Clearly it needs to be addressed. But now we're at a point where dads are spending more time with their kids. We need to figure out how to sustain that. Because that's something that's worth holding on to. Realizing that there are significant portions of the economy that were really just there to middleman money. Those things don't have to come back.
Nope.
I don't care if I have to spend twice as much on a camera so I can interact with somebody online, because I'm interacting with my friends more at home than... It's weird. I've actually spent more time on like Zoom interacting with my friends than I actually saw them in real life normally.
Because it's easier, it's more accessible.
Yeah. And now that this is the only option really for a lot of people, it's being used more. Has more widespread adoption. This is a good thing. The interaction part's a good thing. We don't have to focus on the platform being used because nobody cares what the DJ is doing while you're having fun with your friends. Maybe there's some good to this whole situation that's not being addressed.
Well, I think it forces people to be less frivolous about their friendship, and how they spend their time, because Facebook was making it seem like, oh, you have thousands of friends and you can, oh, if somebody doesn't talk the way you like them, just delete them. Just delete that friend. And it made it feel like people were expendable, because then you go to a party, meet another 100 people who aren't even on your friends list. You add a couple more friends because you only like a couple at the party. But, the way that people were treating humans as disposable, especially friends, you can't treat friends as disposable post-COVID, just because it's like, now you got to be looking at your friends and saying, oh, this person's a really good friend, that's why I've been friends with them for so long, or whatever. I don't really need to go out and meet a bunch of new people and risk like getting sick to meet another person. So I think a lot of people are going to be more inclined to be better friends with the friends they have, knowing that they don't want to rush out and try to meet new people that could be crazy. Like, well, you invest a week in somebody and you find out they're crazy, or 6 weeks or 6 months, and then you find out they're crazy.
Before social media, you had to cultivate relationships with people. Otherwise, you would end up in these really dull, unfulfilling friendships. Mm-hmm. You had to. You didn't have the benefit of, like, and I remember when Instant Messenger first really was, like, everywhere. People were using it all the time. My dad asked me, like, how much time do you actually need to interact with somebody for this to be meaningful? And I decided that it was like, 10 minutes of online, an hour of online time was like maybe 6 to 10 minutes of real-time interaction. Maybe 10 minutes if you've got like really, really solid interaction, but really it's more like 6 minutes for average. Maybe it's only like 3 minutes of passive interacting with somebody at a party, and that's not very meaningful. That's like, what can you actually talk to somebody about in 3 minutes? What can you actually talk to somebody about in 6 minutes? Not very much. You mean, you and I you're one of my best friends. We talk for hours at a time when we talk. And we've been recording our conversations for over a year. That's actually pretty incredible. When I think about that from a more objective perspective, maintaining a 2-hour-long dialogue regularly is just not easy. Mm-hmm. It's not like I think we take for granted the kind of interactions that we have with people on the regular because of social media. We just, you can just tune into the social media feed and see what's going on in people's lives, and that catches you up. But that stuff's really superficial.
For sure. And, one of the reasons I do want to have this show in the first place is because existentially, I think a lot of people have forgotten how to have a conversation that's not just regurgitating other people's perspectives. So I see there's like the common idea that there's a lull in conversation every 7 minutes. Well, that's kind of true if you're regurgitating other people's information or ideas, because every 7 minutes-ish, people need to figure out what they want to discuss, because they're just going down this list of things that they think are interesting or topical because they saw it in the news, or they saw it on Joe Rogan, or they saw it on their site of choice or blog or whatever. They're like, oh, this person said this thing. This was interesting. And then they're like, oh, this person said this thing. And this reminds me. So the conversation that people have is really just it's
like a play-by-play.
Yeah, it's like a football game where you have your fact and then you trade the other person's fact that's either connected or like it's completely disconnected. So you're just trading facts back and forth, and nobody's actually building the conversation together because everybody's so busy tossing facts back and forth that ultimately it's not even actually a conversation. It's just lobbing facts.
Yeah, there's no. How can you develop a joke doing that even?
Well, then that's how they regurgitate jokes, and that's like you hear somebody, "I'm Rick James, bitch. Did you see Chappelle's show?" And that's the part of the conversation where people are like, they don't have the capacity to make their own joke in the context of the conversation. So then you go to, "Did you see this funny thing?" "Oh no?" "Then I'm gonna tell you this funny thing to make you go watch the show. But this is really my way of pretending that I'm actually funny and feeling like I made a joke by just regurgitating something funny I saw." And this habitual culture makes people feel funnier than they are. It makes people feel wittier than they are. It makes people feel more informed than they are because they can take somebody else's constructed, whether it's a joke or something to make them appear smart, which sometimes is written by a group of writers and then just spit out through one person. It just becomes this thing of like, how do I make myself look smart or funny?
That's our problem with the media, is that there's a group of writers who put everything on paper for a performer to sit and read and provide the newscast, and we don't have. It's the same problem with big science, is that at some level the person who's delivering the information isn't even involved in the research. And it's because they are gifted at talking to the money bags and saying, "Oh, well, this is the stuff that we're doing, and these are the things that we're trying to accomplish, and this is what we need more funding for." And at a point, we're left with, I mean, I can't tell you how many technology videos is like, "This is the latest in innovations from circular media," and it's a presentation about science, and it looks really fancy. It looks beautiful, but then I don't believe the person talking because they sound too much like a commercial. But that person talking who sounds like a commercial is perfect for a group of investors who really just want to see the commercial because that's what sells it. It's not the actual data, it's the presentation.
Yep. It's the speculation society, and that's kind of, when everything is when the appearance is more important than the substance. Over and over, we're told that if the packaging isn't good, then the product's not good, and everyone's conditioned to believe that. Then you don't realize, like, oh, the Doritos that don't have the brand name or made in the same factory or whatever it is, whether it's the Trix or the Captain Crunch or anything that is the store-bought brand that's not the name brand. Anytime a kid sees that, they're trained to think that they're not getting the same quality. But when you finally break yourself of that illusion as an adult, it tastes the exact fucking same.
I actually stopped eating Doritos when they. So I think the copyright ran out, and other companies started making their own Doritos type chips, and then so they started creating all the new flavors because they could copyright the new flavors, and they released it was the classic cheddar Dorito with twice the flavor crystals or whatever it was. They doubled up on the seasoning, and it was like Dorito Max or something. And I remember just things like, this is awful. Now I've got twice the Dorito dust all over my hands. I can't taste anything now because I just ate a chip covered in salt.
Yeah.
And it didn't even taste like cheese.
No, they blow out your taste buds, really.
Yeah.
Like, your taste buds need a good 24 hours to reset after you eat Doritos or Dorito-type chips.
That's why with the Lay's chips, they're like, "Bet you can't eat just one." Well, fuck yeah, you can't eat just one, because if you only eat one, you everything tastes like cardboard afterwards. So it's the only thing at that point that you can eat.
Yeah.
I mean, it's worse than a bomb pizza that you have to eat the whole thing, because if you don't, you won't be satisfied, but you won't be able to taste anything afterwards. Because at least a pizza you want to eat, but that's why they call it junk food.
Yeah.
That's maybe junk food needs to come back into the collective lexicon. We need to start calling things what they are, just junk food or trash food, or it shouldn't even be called food. Just junk.
Well, and it's funny because then I think we were talking about how meat was inherently tied with colonialism last year.
Yeah.
And now that the meat supply chain is breaking down, people are flipping out, man.
Yeah.
I think it's hilarious because I'm like, I'll eat an Impossible Burger or not even eat meat. I don't, I may want some ribs, but I don't fucking care about it that much. But to see people flipping out over not being able to get meat as frequently, that shit is just hilarious to me personally.
Yeah.
I love watching people flip out over shit that's not a big deal. Honestly, like, I think it's hilarious.
Like Wendy's taking meat burgers off their menus.
Yeah. Yeah, like people not being able to get a burger at Wendy's and losing their minds over it. Like, I'm gonna laugh at that person all day. Because that shit is hilarious. That's not an actual problem. That shit is funny.
Yeah, that's definitely a first world problem.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like the definition of a first world problem. I think because of all of this COVID stuff, there have been a lot of improvements in people's cooking. Like I see more and more threads where someone's like, I just learned how to do this type of thing, or I just made this, or I'm getting better at making this kind of food. Like, I personally am going deeper into wok style cuisine. So that's like not just stir fries, but soups, and it's actually quite incredible how the diversity of things you can make in a single big ass pan. Yeah. And like yesterday I made spaghetti sauce, but I did it with like stir fry techniques where I separated things out. And I know that a spaghetti sauce is kind of like a stew and you're supposed to cook it all together to get those flavors, but it came out really good. And I was applying techniques that I had learned from, not going out and cooking in. And one of the things that I found is that I can actually leave the meat out of a dish and it still comes out tasting like Chinese food and it still tastes good. And lo and behold, it's this combination of vegetables and oils and soy sauce and just doing it all in the right steps, and it comes out tasting really good. And so the magic isn't in the meat.
No.
At all.
It's in the process.
Yeah.
And Americans have acted like the meat was necessary to make things taste good because they just weren't cooking anything right, to be honest. Like, their burgers aren't that great. The way they cook meat is just slathered in sauce to cover the charring.
Yeah, or they burn it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, to cover the charring. Like,
yeah.
It's ultimately, a lot of Americans eat their shit well done, which is basically just burning the fucking nutrients and the goodness out of the meat.
Yeah.
And then they have to cover it in ketchup or barbecue sauce or some shit like that. Like, or some steak sauce. If you have to put steak sauce on your steak, you cooked it wrong. Is what it comes down to, but that's like quintessentially American because they don't cook meat right here.
So
the shit they cook here, they don't even cook it right.
There's a Japanese hibachi place on the west side of Bloomington called Domo, and that's one of those places where you can get the volcano of onion and where they do that really crazy flat top technique where you can get like perfectly cooked seafood that's not scorched, that doesn't have some giant crust on it from having to season the living crap out of it. When you have to put enough pepper or salt on something that it develops a crust just to make it so that it doesn't stick to the flat top. There's this stuff called oil. Just like half a teaspoon. That'll prevent a whole lot of stuff from sticking to your pan. But the last time I was there, I remember watching people. We're at a Japanese steakhouse. They have all manner of seafood. We're at a sushi bar. They have like all manner of seafood, and everyone there ordered well done steaks at the table next to us. I watched them order well done steaks. And this is a place that has a flat top that can get hot enough to sear, like Wagyu style, like make those crazy seared beef logs that are just, cut perfectly because, super sharp knife. This is a place that can deliver that kind of experience, and people are just getting burnt beef leather. It didn't make any sense. Like, we were right next to what's that place? Texas Roadhouse. We were right next to Texas Roadhouse. We were right next to Outback. You want to get a burnt steak? That's where you go. So.
Oof. Yeah, no, man. I'm just convinced after eating internationally, Americans just have never had good taste, and their sense of themselves is so heightened. Like all of their international food is watered down versions of the actual shit, and then their idea of what American cuisine is all basically either stolen and then presented as if it's the American version, or it's like black cooking that they then put the white version out.
Well, there's a lady in New York who decided to create a Chinese style stir fry wok place, but she was going to take it and make it less greasy and remove all the salt. And it's like, wait a second.
That was a white chick, right?
Yeah. And it failed. It failed in less than a year.
Yeah.
That business did not sustain itself because it had a flawed model. You can't just you can't reinvent a 4,000-year-old culinary tradition.
Right. Yeah.
Like, really? Even like the masters of Cantonese cuisine don't pretend to reinvent the style of cooking. They just come up with new dishes.
No, and the problem was, I don't know if it was New York Times, but the media was trying to hype it up, and the way they were doing it was trying to be like, we don't want to eat any of that gross, unhealthy Chinese food. If you want some healthy food, come get the white version of the Chinese food. We do it better than the Chinese. And that was the way that they were pushing it off in the media. And then they were trying to act like that's not the subtext that they were pushing out. And then they were like, no, everything's not racial. Everything's not racist. We're just trying to say we're making healthy food. We weren't saying Asian food is unhealthy in general. We were just saying our recipes don't have that much MSG or oil in them.
According to the WHO, overall rates of obesity in China are between 5 and 6% for the country.
What's America?
Let's see. Okay, these numbers are a lot bigger than I thought they were going to be. Sorry. The overweight obese percentage for the overall United States population are higher, reaching 39.4% in 1997, 44.5% in 2004, 56.5% in 2007, 63% adults, 17% of children in 2008. So...
Oh my God.
I mean,
dude, we're in Wall-E already.
I know.
Wall-E was supposed to be like 20 years in the future. We're already in Wall-E.
No, Wall-E's like several generations into the future.
Oh shit! Yeah, it's been a minute, but fuck yeah, it wasn't supposed to be right that quick. Holy shit!
I mean, you want to complain about Chinese food? Let's look at the obesity rates.
Whoa! Oh my God!
It's like 10 times worse in the United States than it is in China, and Chinese people are eating Chinese food. I mean,
good God!
Like, that's just, and here's some more about China. In highly densely populated, urbanized areas with high degree of urbanization, you have obesity rates as high as 20%. But only in cities where fast food, probably Western fast food, is popular.
Well, I think it's a sedentary lifestyle. I mean, obviously not. It's multifaceted, but
I think it's the same
I'm starting
reasons.
to think it's like sedentary lifestyles coming with Westernization.
Yeah.
For 8 to 12 hours a day of sitting, and not being active at all, for 5 to 7 days a week. Yeah, then you throw in some sodium laden burger shit on top of that. Yeah, people are gonna become obese.
In China, it was 30% in the 80s, and it declined to less than 12% by 2014. It's just on the
Wow.
decline.
Huh.
Like it looks like well, there's that whole culture of doing exercises in the morning,
Right.
and not just doing exercises, but group exercise. So you feel compelled to maintain with your peers because those are your peers. If they can do it, then you should be able to as well. And if you can't, then did you injure yourself? If you have, then go to a doctor and get it looked at because this is China and that's how socialism works.
Yeah.
Go see a doctor. They've got a lot of doctors. They had so many doctors that they were able to mobilize their national healthcare system to send doctors where they were needed.
It's so crazy how
Can we
much
even do that?
misinformation we hear. No, God, no. We're so understaffed. Man, because that's, if we had a force that was like
Our military.
NASA or the military, but for healthcare, we would not be in the problem we have right now. But then you wouldn't be able to charge people or rationalize exorbitant costs for healthcare if we had that service.
Yeah.
But this cult, man, this cult of capitalism got people brainwashed thinking they need to spend their entire lives working to pay for medical bills.
I'm just looking at these numbers. It's just scary, the obesity rate in this country. How can we even, it can't be, there's no solution if people can't go out and be mobile.
Well, I was thinking about it. I think what's going to end up happening is martial arts and physical education is going to have to become online because this is a major problem and I don't think people have even realized is a risk. Like, say we have, let's say for 5 years, just 5 years, we don't have the capacity for people to learn martial arts. Guess what? That means after that 5 years, we don't ever have the same systems, martial arts are gone in the way we know them because we didn't record them properly. Like, I can see how quickly something like martial arts can disappear and become mysticized because, let's say, for example, all the people who have black belts now, if they don't figure out a way to pass on that knowledge dies with them. Yeah. And there's no more taekwondo, there's no more karate, there's no more Muay Thai, there's no more jujitsu, because it wasn't recorded in the proper manner. And then the only way that people are going to be able to learn it is reverse engineer it from mixed martial arts and fucking texts and kung fu flicks. So then it's like, that is an actual possibility that we're facing right now. People aren't even thinking about shit like that. Yeah. So we're talking about how are people going to stay healthy? Well, we're going to have a bunch of people like who are physical trainers and martial arts teachers who are going to lose their jobs if they don't figure out how to connect those people who need this physical education in their homes now. And they're going to keep getting more and more obese. This is like the problem that just happened is so much bigger than people even realize. Like, they're trying to do the UFC. They need to be trying to preserve martial arts, period. They need to be recording masters and getting visual records of all of these styles and all of their moves and all that shit, how you operate with two people. Like, UFC and Pride and all of Bellator, all of those things may be the only thing that saves martial arts in the future. That may be what literally saves martial arts, and we didn't even realize that shit could happen.
So I think it was like a couple of years ago when the seed bank failed, the one that was designed to last through an ice age, but then the glacier next to it melted and flooded the place because they didn't factor that in their survivability plan. It occurs to me that we as a species have not been preparing ourselves to survive whatever it is that comes. Like, how do we preserve humanity at all? The seed banks are going to get destroyed on the journey to whenever we actually are able to use them again. If we lose the technology that stores the information, or we even, let's say we find a way that is instantly retrievable, that'll survive 1,000 years, like a book, how do we preserve the knowledge of how to even use the book? We're very poorly prepared for this. This is not a maybe. This is like a how soon is it going to happen type of scenario, more than a if it's going to happen. Because the next ice age is going to happen, and it's going to change everything very slowly. It'll take a couple 100,000 years. And by the time it's done, we may have lost significant portions of human culture. Like, the stuff that we define humanity with might be lost. And it won't be because we didn't try. It'll just be because we couldn't see far enough into the future to know. I think that's like the danger of, we look at hieroglyphs and cuneiform, and we try to, and people who've been studying it their whole lives say, well, this is what this stuff means. And it's like, yeah, but how are they using it? Are we sure? Or are we just kind of interpreting it and throwing on some colonialism to describe it because that's the way we think it is? I saw a thread where people were talking about how in Korea and Vietnam, when somebody gets COVID, the state plays it around on the radio, and they let people know in the neighborhoods. They like blast that shit. And the one of the comments I saw was like they dox them and publicly shame them. And I was thinking, it's like, well, that's really uniquely American.
Yeah, that's a weird way to see it.
Yeah, and I thought it's like, way to colonize the response of the citizens of South Korea, guys. Like, how do we even? We can't even. People are unable to recognize the effect of colonialism on their language.
Mm-hmm.
They've already. How are we to expect people to recognize when they're engaging in an attempt at colonizing a reporting of information? We can't count on people to recognize that in their own language. I'm sure that I do it too, without realizing it.
I mean, at least that's the first step, is being aware that it exists, to try to remove it in your own. Like, I think everybody who was born in a colonial society does it. It's just a matter of how much do they do to try to stop doing it and decolonize their minds. Decolonizing your mind is something everybody has to do, whether you're black, white, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, whatever. If you're in a society that has any sort of history, you still have to decolonize your mind. That's just part of being in the modern, existence. But it's possible. It's colonization is just one element of existence that is not the permanent thing. They're just trying to make it feel like the permanent.
Yeah, and then it also comes with this can't develop into a mantra of decolonize your mind, because that's just like neo-colonization of the mind.
Yeah, exactly. It's just one step. It's just a step out.
Yeah.
Exceptional Radio.
Exceptional Randos Show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio.